Hello, my name is Martin Gibson. Continuing from the introduction to the meditations on the Essential Trigon, we have broken this unified view of the four essential capacities with their existential natures into three meditational contemplations in one communion. Each of the four is a separate focus for our purposes in the modeling of the Essential Trigon, each with a different aim in the direction of the four essentials and with a distinct goal of understanding that perception at a fundamental depth of focus on their natures. For the first focus as Contemplation 1, the aim is understanding life as essential principles through a study of those existential natures, initially and principally with the intentional capacity of spiritual nature. The goal is the development of dynamic balance as the fundamental subjective position to be understood by the soul at any and all hierarchical levels of living. This balance is found at the central intersection between a major vertical axis proceeding from a source of intentional universality as the spiritual purpose at the top and flowing to its intended existential image as the specific nature of the soul at the bottom, and a minor horizontal axis, that of inertial invariance to the left in the material natures and of morphological capacity as a continuous flux to the right in the ideal natures. When I come across perplexing phenomena as things warranting investigation, I found it beneficial to break it down into these four components. What is the intentional nature, the purpose or function of those things in a form or process being investigated? What are the inertial natures, the tendency of the things to remain invariant or regularly repetitious in time and space? What are the formal natures, the ideal logic and reason, materially, ideally, and spiritually represented in the observed things as forms and processes? And what is the motivational nature, instinctive, logical, and intuitive, of both the investigator and the source of the investigated things, in particular with respect to the relationship between the essential capacity and the existential nature of the risk and opportunity represented or faced by both? Thank you. The intentional capacity of the spiritual natures is represented in isolation within the essential trigon here, as in the next four slides, as life of intended form and process, as essentially principled, and the manner of a Venn diagram in which an applicable quality or property is defined by the set's boundary as a limit to the range of that enclosed quality. The three essential boundary capacities, inertial, formal, and intentional, are properties within the field of the essential trigon, deemed to apply at any and all phenomena as forms and processes experienced within the field of nature represented by the trigon. To these three essentials is added the imaging capacity to replicate and self-replicate the three as existential instances or repeated events. The imaging capacity, shown as the inverted trigon in the subsequent slides, can be understood to represent the aggregate of all existential forms and processes within the bound field, as well as any individual instance of a human being or other form of sentient life. Thus, life, as an intentional capacity of spiritual nature, may be viewed as a boundary condition to a subset field of living forms and processes at one scale, and a discrete expression of the imaging capacity of the soul nature within the larger scale on the other. Think of the cells and microbiome of the human body on the one hand, and the interaction of that soul within the community and environment on the other. The three constraints depicted as boundaries are essential capacities that pervade the field along with the imaging capacity embodied in all living forms. The first of these field constraints, as the intentional capacity of spiritual natures, is designated as life of intentional forms and processes, governed logically by essential principles. We will next look at these four principles considered as separate components, while keeping in mind that they are fully integrated as one essential experience of life, as shown after these four slides. In that depiction of the essential trigon, the three boundary capacities that define the trigon have been transferred to each apex area opposite the defining boundary. As a result, the intentional capacity at the base of the trigon on the left subtends and corresponds to the apex at top. As shown, the intentional capacity is a foundation for all life as the sum of the intended forms and processes encountered in our experience. With respect to the field of experience in which this occurs, we note that life is the source of this field, which is timeless. The second of the field constraints, as the inertial capacity of material natures, is designated as the appearance of intended forms and processes, understood as quantifiable physical phenomena. The inertial capacity, shown in the thumbnail form to the left, subtends the angle at the lower left at 2A, shown in the larger form. It is the inertial capacity that provides for the observation of appearance in any and all of the senses as intended forms and processes in our experience. With respect to the universe of experience, the topology of the field of appearances is that of a sink, in contrast to the intentional source, the latter of which is constantly moving forward in time, even though what appears to the senses is effectively always in the past. In this sense, we are continually backing our way into the future. The third field, as the formal capacity of ideal natures, is designated in terms of Platonic thinking as the quality of intended forms and processes observed and recognized as operational in the collective understanding of social interactions studied as political economics. The formal capacity of the boundary of the thumbnail subtends the angle at 3Q in the large trigon as a recognition of the quality of the intended forms and processes found in the field of life experience. That recognition is essentially mental in its nature, in both understanding the observed and in giving intent to the evolving forms and processes. This covers a spectrum of effectively understanding the intentional nature or the intended purpose of those forms and processes. With respect to topology, the field is extended in time bidirectionally, as our experience can see in our understanding of causation into the past and in our forecasting predictability of processes into the future. Though we have associated these three distinct essential capacities with different aspects of the essential trigon for logical purposes as boundary constraints and related operational extents designated in each apex, the capacities for life, appearance, and quality of form and process are equally omnipresent in operational extent as represented here, though of varying intensity as existentially manifested in time and space. Not designated as a boundary constraint or extent is the imaging capacity, the ability of the field to focus itself as a subjective, localized function of that field on some aspect of the field considered to be an objective phenomena as form and process. Such focusing and imaging is an existential act, but the imaging potential for that act is a fourth capacity, co-equal and coterminous with the other three throughout the field. This imaging capacity for change, designated by C, when existentially active, focuses on the intentional, inertial, and formal capacities of the field and their three related natures, as spiritual life, material appearance, and ideal quality in determining what is objective in nature. As a function of the soul nature, it does this through the subjective focusing of three principal cognitive capacities. These are, at 1C, innate or instinctive recognition of subjectivity as a factor in the intentional behavior of autonomous life forms in 1L. At 2C, logical recognition of objectivity in the interactions of inertial material forms and processes in 2A. And at 3C, intuitive recognition and understanding of intersubjectivity in the interplay of living forms and processes in 3Q. Thus, using the concept of the soul nature as a function of change agency within the essential trigon, we can understand the above image as both an essential and existential trigon. This form is equivalent to a rotation of the initial position of the essential trigon about its center point, or a flip of the initial form from the horizontal and vertical central axes in either order. To recap at this point, the net result shows the interplay of the four capacities as essentials designated by the enumerated abbreviations prior to the initiation of any existential forms or processes. The three capacities associated with the initial boundaries are now associated with the apex regions opposite those boundary designations. The baseline boundary is now associated with the top apex, the right side boundary with the lower left, and the left side boundary with the lower right, creating a natural affinity according to the numbering between the change agency of the soul nature and the three other designations. These four capacities are essential, meaning they apply as potentials even in the absence of any existential forms. This imaging of the soul natures is a creation at an individual or group level or scale of the three essential capacities. From 1L at the top, the intentional capacity of spiritual natures is mapped to the innate cognitive nature at 1C, according to its instinctive, genetically specified makeup, for living with and in its ecosphere of the material and ideal natures, as indicated on either side, at its creation or re-entry at birth. From 2A, the inertial capacity of material natures is mapped to the logical capacity on the upper right, flanked by the axiomatic spiritual and ideal natures at 2C. From 3Q, the formal capacity of the ideal natures at lower right is mapped to the intuitive capacity at the upper left at 3C, between the material and collective spiritual natures. As drawn, this depicts the three essential capacities of the imaged soul as being outside the field of potential capacities, and is fancifully imagined rather than integrally imaged. This view creates an illusory perspective of the soul as an ego that is in part outside the world that has borne it. When this illusion is realized and the necessary perspective adjusted, those capacities are understood not as a separate soul nature, but located within the imaging capacity of the essential trigon as a co-equal subset with the other three capacities, shown here as the smaller of the two inverted trigons. They are not as the three separate extensions within the dotted lines outside the essential trigon would seem to indicate, external to those capacities. Instead, the image of those three are mirrored, reflected along each of the three dotted borders to the smaller inverted trigon, imaged within the capacity of the soul natures, even as the three primary capacities are similarly imaged, but without reflection, as essentials, still outside the imaged capacity of existential forms. These apex areas of the smaller essential trigon represent the potential for material form 2A, for ideal form 3Q, and for spiritual presence 1L, within the manifest or existential universe of natures. As the illusion of the ego dissipates, the soul nature, as the agency for change, comes to see the three essential capacities of life, appearance, and quality, as three expressions of a monistic source that is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. Such realization represents a state of transcendental awareness. Note the three trapezoidal essential areas marked with an EX suffix, outside the inverted triangle as an agency of change, and between the dashed lines and the three invariant capacities. AEX is the objective area of observation of appearances as the material world. QEX is the subjective area of recognition of the continuity of quality that informs the soul of the nature of that material world from the content of the ideal world. LEX is the intersubjective area of immediacy in understood communion with life in that world as purpose. The three capacities of the soul nature as embodied complete the existential picture. The larger of the two hexagons delineates the existential or manifest extent of the field of perception and activity of the totality of soul natures within the boundless and limitless field. These are represented by the three triangles outside the large hexagon marked as omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. Yet even in the midst of the manifest, the immanent soul, marked as the agency of change, has within it the resonant perpetual transcendence represented by the inner hexagon as one with the threefold manifest essence. The area inside this parallelogram represents a materialist perspective from a monist notion of all conscious forms and processes arising from the omnipresence of inertial properties. The highlighted inclusion of the three omni areas of the essential trigon does not mean that the perspective of any of the three related cognitive capacities of the soul grokks the fullness of that studied area of the field of awareness. It means the perspective of this slide extends the focus axiomatically to include the region 2AES, omnipresence, to indicate that the worldview of 2C is wholly materialist, some call it physicalist, views the entire experience of the soul nature to be an epiphenomenal effect of the ever-present inertial capacity of material nature, according to the axiom and laws that the logical mind has come to attribute to that nature as energetic matter. Being well ordered, that logical mind may tend to understand its existence as the emergent focus of that mind out of primordial energetic matter, conceptualized as chaos, using the mathematics of probability. An irony of that approach is that the stochastic assumptions based in a notion of random non-sentient inertial interactions has led to chaos theory, in which the phenomena that are thought to be random in their generation are found in their existential natures to represent an essential order. Such essential foundations of that represented natural order can be seen to either side of 2C as ideal in the 2QEX and or spiritual in 2LEX. In fact, the logical world view of a materialist might be better represented as above, where the subjective perspective at 2C views that material nature encapsulated in the logical prism of 2AEX, not understanding that the position at 2C is subconsciously supported by the spiritual nature of 2LEX and the ideal nature of 2QEX. The area inside this parallelogram represents a similar idealist perspective with a monist notion of all conscious forms and processes arising from the omniscience of formal mental properties. Again, the perspective of this slide is extended axiomatically to include the region 3QES as omniscience, to indicate that the worldview from 3C as outlined in bold represents an unrestrained, perhaps solipsistic idealism, which views the experience of the soul nature to be the personal realization of the prescient capacity of ideal nature, which the individual has come to attribute as the source of all observed and comprehended forms and processes. The intuitive worldview of an idealist might be better represented as above, where the subjective perspective at 3C views the ideal nature through the logical prism as contained in 3QEX, not understanding or perhaps only grudgingly acknowledging that the position at 3C is subconsciously supported by the spiritual nature of 3LEX and what should be the obvious material world view at 3AEX. This area in bold represents the dualistic perspective with respect to materialism and idealism, that is agnostic or atheistic with respect to an intentional foundation of life. In the view of life indicated by the areas here, the intuitive and logical capacities of the soul nature are primarily focused in a dualist view on the appearance of material natures and a recognition of varying degree of the quality of ideal natures. The innate capacity 1C in this slide is focused on those same two natures and fails to recognize the reality of the formless intentional spiritual natures of 1LEX, 2LEX, and 3LEX. This view is agnostic to all three of the fundamental capacities as essential to life at 1LES, 2AES, and 3QES. The area inside this parallelogram represents an intentional perspective with a monistic notion that all conscious forms and processes arise from the omnipotence of spiritual nature. In this third extension of the soul nature, the innate capacity at 1C is extended axiomatically into an understanding of the essential intentional capacity at 1LES, so that the spiritual nature is experienced not as a deity or the deity in time and place, but as the formless, eternal, purposeful source of all love, wisdom, and power that is experienced in life, in the eternal present, here and now. This truncated parallelogram in bold represents an intentional perspective of life, perhaps as animistic or polytheistic, involving contact with the spiritual realm, but without a monistic notion as a conceptual understanding for that view. The third cognitive aspect features the innate capacity at 1C, which is focused on the intentional capacity of the spiritual natures by individual souls for support in life. This view can run the spectrum of interpretation from a pantheistic notion in which all forms and processes of the material natures is understood to be a direct, intended manifestation of a spiritual source in 2LEX, of the source of the individual's own self found in the supreme deity in one LEX, and of the ideal natures deemed to be motivated over a range of the unseen world, inseparable from the individual's animating thoughts, deemed responsible for everything that happens in life, from elemental spirits or ghosts to a monotheistic notion of the supreme deity in 3 LEX. Okay, next we'll take a little different perspective on this from the concept of the essential tetrahedron, which is essentially just a matter of folding these 4 forms, which we've designated as here, with life, appearance, quality, and the imaging capacity as agency of change in the middle. And with some cutting and pasting, we get the following. Well, the 3 what are essential and always remain essential are potentials of this concept. We start with the intentional capacity of spiritual natures as life of intended form and process. One of the other faces of the 3 upper faces is the inertial capacity of material natures of intended form and process. And then the quality of intended form and process as representing the formal capacity of ideal natures. Back to the first, if we rotate up, we see that the base of this, of the essential trigon is, or in this case, essential tetrahedron, is the imaging capacity of soul nature, which is the agency of change of form and process by focused intention. So there we have it. That's the three essential, and they're actually, in this case, they're all essentials. These are unmanifest, or the potentials to create the corresponding natures of spiritual nature, material nature, ideal nature, or mental capacity, and of the soul nature. And from there, we'll next look at the existential version of that. And the difference is, with the existential version, the existential world starts at the base and goes up to this line here. Note that above that, you still have the essential capacities, same 3 essential capacities, and as in the other sheet that we've looked at before, these forms have been folded along the dotted line to produce here. Oh, it's hard to do this backwards. And this is fun. Down here and then back. Well, anyway, you know what I'm doing. So, what we have then is the 3 cognitive capacities of change agency on the base of the tetrahedron, the existential world up to these 3 boundaries of existential awareness. We'll have one more look at this now. We take that same concept and open it up. Aha! We have within it omnipotence at the top, omnipresence, and omniscience over here, and the agency of change is in the middle. But these are all potentials. This is a potential here. Even At the boundary of the existential world, we have the capacity to continue this. So, as you might expect, within that other world, if we keep looking at this, we'll find a case of like Russian dolls, I guess you'd call them, with the same, on a smaller scale, the same features. I haven't gone to any more trouble than this, but this is same features as the other existential. And within it is going to be the same three primary potentials or essential capacities with the base as the capacity for existential existence at the bottom of that. Ad infinitum going the other way, we might think. That's my supposition anyway. So, the Essential Trigon provides a framework in which to view any number of conditions of life, based on the three fundamental cognitive capacities of innate natural intelligence as instinct, with the addition of programmable logical reason and inspirational intuition. These capacities are naturally aligned with instinct at the bottom of a vertical axis, since it is naturally evolved to look to authoritative cues and directions for navigating the spiritual realm of intention, as a guide in navigating the material and ideal realms of risk and opportunity. Intuition and logic govern the horizontal axis. Intuition as it connects with the ideal realm of qualitative forms and processes, and logic with the material realm of quantitative forms and processes, and looking for the same cues and directions. Thus, in the popular mind, faith comes to be associated with intuition and the ideal natures in understanding this subjective perspective on the quality of life. And science comes to be associated with logic and natural and material natures in understanding the objective perspective as the quantifiable forms and processes that are qualitatively recognized. This last slide is shown again at left, introduces us to the concept of understanding the need for a means of addressing the existential nature of things, both seen and unseen, by developing balance in the application of science and faith in life. This balance is predicated on being aware of the fourfold essential capacities and their manifested natures, as we have been discussing. The customary way of looking at this is by the philosophical and theological concepts of tradition, where a divine realm is assigned to omnipotence as the intentional capacity of one LES to create all forms and processes, a physical world to the omnipresent inertial capacity of two AES to embody those forms and processes, and the ideal world of mind and emotions to the omniscient formal capacity of three QES to appropriately and efficiently provide the forms and processes of embodied intent for adaptation of those created forms and processes for living in the world of change in CES. As seen here, these four essential capacities are equally necessary on all scales, though in varying degree, as there is a necessary hierarchical sequence involved as can be understood in their interactions. To facilitate this, we can superimpose a set of coordinates to depict a dynamic interplay of these forms and processes, as shown against the background of the capacities of the essential trigon and the natures of the existential trigon. The primary intentional capacity expressed in the spiritual natures is logically necessary in initiating impulse to any endeavor, required to create and change an existing form or process in material nature. Often that form or process, once initiated, is repetitious, sustained by the inertial capacity of material nature itself, as an intended form or process in place and over time. Think of waves in an ideal stretched string. In keeping with the foregoing analysis, this initiatory capacity provides a repetitive imaging process from a universality of source in one LES, at the universe of particularity in specific local imagings of the innate capacity in place and time at 1C. Thus, in terms of general concepts, we have the vertical axis shown from universality at the top to particularity at the bottom. By virtue of that same logic, a logic of continuity in changing capacity must necessarily intervene between the initiating impulse and a resulting form or process intended by the initiating principle to persist for an intended use at the intended place and time. Generally, this mediating formal process requires the least amount of activity, the least action required to effect the intended change, though unintended consequences of that action are also possible. With respect to the two essential capacities at the base of the trigon, material inertial nature on the left and ideal formal nature on the right, the assignment of a fixed position or station on the left end of the horizontal axis is straightforward, so that the other end of the axis necessarily becomes rational motion as the notion of constant but well-defined change. In the center, at the origin of the two axes, is a position of dynamic balance. The enlightened perspective is to maintain focus at the center of what is possible, in general terms as here on dynamic balance, along the vertical range of applicable scope in space from universality to particularity, or global to local, and along the horizontal range as an applicable scope of frequency in that space and therefore of time, from invariant station to constant motion. The balancing approach to adjusting the dynamic of the existential expression of the essential trigon is to use the wisdom to be found through science with love to be found through faith, once the fundamentals of leveling the vertical axis is understood. This perspective can be used to operate on the three cognitive capacities of the soul. We can think of this in the manner of the manipulation of three leveling screws in setting up a survey instrument. In the construction trades, a theodolite is used to measure angles within a vertical or horizontal plane. In simplified form, for purposes of leveling a site or foundation of a building, a telescope that is free to rotate in full circle is mounted on the top of a tripod so that any point sighted as centered in the scope can be understood to be on the same level as the center of the telescope tube. For this level sighting to be accurate, the base of the top of the tripod on which the telescope sits and rotates must ideally be in a precisely level plane, but the base of the top of the tripod, which we might metaphorically equate with the essential trigon, will in general not be precisely level with respect to the ground. To correct for this natural imprecision, the telescope base is made of two trigonal pieces connected by three leveling screws. The trivet connected to the top of the tripod legs on the bottom, and the tribrach supporting the telescope of the theodolite on the top of the three screws, which operate independently of each other within certain limits in leveling the tribrach. We might assign a leveling screw to each of the 3 points shown at right under the three capacities used in interacting with the world. At 1C, innate, 2C logical, and 3C intuitive cognition. The goal of setting up the theodolite is to make the tribrac level, so that in any direction one rotates the telescope, the center plane will be accurately focused on the same level in the field of observation, as registered by the circle, here representing a spirit level, with center marked as a condition of dynamic balance. The central position of the inner hexagon, representing the soul natures, thinking of the essential trigon as the tribrac, is a readout stating the current direction in which the eyepiece of the telescope is pointing with respect to level. This value, out of balance, is designated in the 4 peripheral readouts, indicates the current state of the essential trigon from the perspective of a soul or party of the community looking through that eyepiece. This means that the base of the telescope is weighted by an instinctive outlook in some manner at 1C, thereby lowering that side of the trigon. The bubble will be seen to move from the major existential axis toward the upper apex at 1 LES, placing particularity in the center of the inner hexagon, and the telescope will be looking above the equilibrium plane of the essential trigon. If 1C is elevated, the bubble will appear to move in that direction, moving universality into central focus. A similar case will occur if 2C or 3C are lowered or raised. Note that the spirit bubble does not move in this scenario, as it is always pointing up to heaven. It is the view of the world around us that is affected by the direction we point the telescope that moves the tribrac beneath the bubble. As the base of the focus of innate instinctive capacity, at the base of the focus of instinctive innate capacity, in response to the perception of existential risk and opportunity, is an approach to experiential knowledge that is liberal in its outlook for increasing opportunity and conservative for decreasing risk toward life in the field of the natural and community environment. At the point of intuitive capacity is an approach to shared formal knowledge and understanding of the quality of life, an approach which is liberal in increasing love and conservative in decreasing fear in the community. At the point of logical capacity in verification of the validity of balancing experiential and formal knowledge is an approach that is liberal in its openness to and acceptance of wisdom and conservative against fostering ignorance in that community. At any point in time, the motivation for an individual's soul may be focused on the periphery of the circle in response to and for the intent of either good or ill. The motivation for the community as a whole should be to maintain that point of dynamic balance at the center for the capacity and nature in question. Again, this balance is achieved by being liberal, seeking opportunity, and conservative, encountering risk. Liberal, encouraging love, and conservative, inspiring fear. Liberal, applying wisdom, and conservative, fostering ignorance. The perverse imbalance flips this approach, being conservative, seeking opportunity, and liberal, encountering risk. Conservative about encouraging love, and liberal with respect to inspiring fear. Conservative in the sharing of wisdom gained, and liberal in preserving ignorance. This same liberal conservative advice can apply whether the 3 leveling screws start out as lowered or raised with respect to the level equilibrium of the trigon. Though the nature of the advice will generally differ in terms of its operational mix, liberal and conservative, based on whether the apex screw is lowered or raised. So, if 2C is lowered and understood by the community to represent a material economic downturn, policy that is liberal with money in that community may be wise if the problem is unmet demand with a resource or production supply glut. But if there's a supply shortfall, money will only feed inflation. A conservative approach that encourages investment may be sound, but not if it ignores the apparent pitfalls of that policy. Here, the existential focus and current balance of a soul within the community is shown to be that of particularity, a preoccupation with specific details and individual perspective, which, while necessary from time to time for any particular task at hand, is obviously out of balance if it is constantly maintained throughout the whole community. From an analogous theosophical perspective, the ideal goods of the soul and the community are substituted from the last slide as shown. Dynamic balance is replaced in the position of essential equilibrium by grace or sattva, which is harmony, and dharma, which is moral duty. Station is replaced by tamas or inertia. Motion by passion as emotion or rajas. Universality by predestiny, as in universally determined. Particularity by the concept of being an independent life operating through the concept of free will. Here, the essential focus and current balance within the community is shown to be that of free will, which is wedded to a preoccupation with individual freedom to the exclusion of responsibility in the community, and is obviously out of balance. Here, the existential focus and current balance within the community is shown to be that of passion, or preoccupation with individual or group hedonistic indulgence or passionate emotions, to the exclusion again of responsibility to the community, obviously out of balance. Here, the existential focus and current balance within the community is shown to be that of inertia, or preoccupation with individual or group indulgence or lethargy, to the exclusion again of responsibility to the community, and is obviously out of balance. Not shown in these slides is the focus on predestiny, which will be a slavish attitude toward authority. Here, essential equilibrium corresponds with the existential and current position in the center understood in the philosophy of transcendental phenomenology as dynamic balance, replaced in the center of the essential trigon by the enlightened soul, in Western theology as grace, or in Eastern teaching regarding sattva and dharma as harmony and moral duty. We shall see later in our third contemplation that this is reflected in our re-elaboration of Plato's Republic. Many of these individual slides could be expanded into a separate elaborative presentation of each. The point in this outline is to give an idea of the necessary connections of these four capacities in the production and recognition of the related four existential aspects of these forms and processes as natural phenomena. Modern science tends to model intentionality, as in the case of conscious purpose, as emergent phenomena of discrete life forms evolved from the fittest material processes after fighting to survive and propagate their individual forms. This necessarily must be traced back to the basic components of those molecular structures which had de facto survival intent, perhaps to viral components looking for a cell wall to invade, which is kind of a fuzzy concept. If fitness materially, therefore inertially, defines an emergent survival intention, then survival intent looks a bit too much like the cart trying to lead the horse. There's nothing wrong with the concept of survival of the fittest, though it is a bit like showing you can pick the winner of a competition only after the race has been run. Clearly, whatever it is that has a desire to survive is not the elements and molecules from which the biological structures of life are built. They exist in perpetuity. Somewhere along the road, the driver of the cart had to hook the horse to the cart in the right order before embarking on this journey. We could and should follow the snake eating its tail back to the beginning to see how it all started. Again, modern science has gotten where it is, starting with Bacon, Galileo, and Newton, by quite successfully over the last half a millennium, removing the notion of intentionality from experimental setups to verify predicted model conclusions. It has done this very well intentionally, we might add. The result is a set of well-defined systems of ideal scientific logic, which are intentionally well-known, well-applied, and well-tested in moving the system of material understanding forward. That is, until the start of the last century, when the well-understood process born of fussiness and deterministic mathematics began to clash with the fuzziness of stochastic thermodynamics and quantum mechanics. At some point, the complexity of molecular condensed matter required for exhibiting survival intent must have arisen from fundamental elemental forms, most of which is hydrogen. So we should look at the next in contemplation, too, for an understanding of hydrogen as the only building block of matter that matters. One that, like the notion of the essential trigon, has emerged from another case of something from nothing, or that is, from no thing. The following slides are a repeat from the introduction of the meditations on the essential trigon presentation, hawking my publishing efforts for our mutual educational fun and profit. Thank you once again. An alternative trigon might be understanding the truth of such a communion with my high school and lifelong friend J.C. and our fellow travelers from a couple of weeks on the Greek island of Paros in the summer of 1972. Here's one such from a cover of the book recounting those days as planned and reimagined as occurring in 1971, while being written in 1973. It was subsequently elaborated in 2021 with personal reflections and formalized in ideal fashion as the essential trigon there, before finding its way into the content of this PowerPoint presentation in 2023. The first section and part of the book, the Paris Commune of 1971, is the Remembering Happily part, written in 1973 after returning from Europe, with a preface written in 2022 prior to publishing. The second part, which is also the start of the second section, 2021 and beyond, was written at various times over the past 2 decades while reflecting on my spiritual adventures of the first several years after leaving Paros, leading up to my return to North Carolina in 1976, after building a cabin in Washington State to house myself while writing the great American novel. It never happened as life intervened. After my wife read the original manuscript from 1973 and thought it a good read, the first with the second part were combined for publication in the spring of 2022 as the Paris Commune of 1971, subtitled Imagings of Soul and Community. The ISB numbers are shown here. All are available online and by order through your local bookstore. But as I realized I wasn't done writing, I added a third part attached to the section 2021 and beyond as the Essential Trigon in 4 chapters as meditational exercises, which is the backbone content of this video presentation, consisting of Contemplation 1, Life as Essential Principles, Contemplation 2, Appearance of Physical Phenomena, Contemplation 3, The Quality of Political Economy, and Communion, Love, Wisdom, and Community. With this third part, the final tome became the Paris Commune of 1971 to 2021 and beyond. Here shown with the appropriate ISB numbers, all in hardback, paperback, and EPUB form. However, since things were not confusing enough at this point in my literary journey, I decided that there might be one or two people that were interested in the spirituality and philosophy without the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I repurposed the writing of the second section, parts 2 and 3, though I'm sure at my age that I can't understand why anyone would want to contemplate anything without a view of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, perhaps in the rearview mirror. This repurposed material can be found as the Paris Commune 2021 and beyond, with the appropriate ISBN numbers, in paperback and EPUB form. Buy the book. You'll like it in one form or another. Linked references in the second section of the chapters on Contemplation 2 and 3 are to monographs related to modeling a physical theory, 7 of those, and investigative political economy, 3. These have been compiled together this year under a separate title as Unification in Physics and Political Economy, subtitled by an introduction, The Aim and Goal of All Modeling, Clarity in Navigating Risk and Opportunity. These are offered in paperback and hardback version. The print versions are available through local bookstores and online, but the EPUB version is not available as of this time. With this reference made, we move on to the presentation of the Essential Trigon after one final introductory slide that has meaning to me. We started this presentation with a contemplation of an equilateral triangle, but the significance comes from recognizing the potential for detail that might emerge from meditating on the mix of these three boundary constraints, as can be found within the field itself, within the triangle. Hence a name with greater specificity here as the really essential trigon. If colored red similar to here, I know the authenticity of this particular form well, from many faithful communions with a Bass ale bottle. Finally, we have some contact information if anyone is interested. Much of what is provided in the slide presentation can be found online in various forms at the website uniservant.org. Peace and love.